Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hour of History podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bauman, and this week on the show, I have with me a founding member of the Footnoting History podcast, Christine Caccipuoti. Not only was working on her master's degree at Fordham University, but she was also acting in New York City and creating what is now in its 6th year of running the Footnoting History podcast. And you might have guessed that takes a little bit of hard work, determination, and a whole lot of other stuff that Christine breaks down for you in this episode that is both insightful and inspiring. I have a funny story about the Footnoting History podcast. In fact, when I was a young lad applying to PhD programs, the Footnoting History podcast was one that kind of drew me to Fordham University. I thought it was so cool that there was a university where students were collaboratively working on a podcast, and although it's not directly connected to the university, the podcast certainly promoted on the website, and it's just sort of an enormous achievement, and something going on 6 years is something we can all work towards. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. You're going to learn a whole lot in this episode, and head on over to hourofhistory.com/to subscribe as always, and go check out Footnoting History and subscribe and give their podcast a listen as well. It's a fantastic podcast. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Hour of History podcast.
Our world, anytime, any place.
With your host, Stephen Bauman, and producer, James Albel. The Hour of History is a member of Episodic Network, an association of fun, interesting, and informative podcasts. EpisodicNetwork.com. Without further delay, your Hour of History starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Hour of History. This is your host, Stephen Bauman, and this week I have with me Christine Caccipuoti. Christine, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, about what you do, and we can take it from there. Yeah.
I'm very happy that you asked me to be here. This is my first full-length interview, so I'm really excited.
Yes.
I am the assistant producer for the podcast Footnoting History. This month, February of 2019, is our 6th anniversary, so we're very excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we've been sort of, bumbling along at the beginning, and we've sort of figured it all out now, we think. But there's always room to learn and grow. I have my master's degree in medieval history from Fordham University. But if people know me from the podcast, they probably more associate me with Napoleonic history, because that has sort of been where I've found my niche and where I live now more often than not. And that's where we are.
Awesome. This is so exciting. 6 years is no small achievement for a podcast. I think I was reading that the average podcast ends after 10 episodes.
Oh, I was like 10 years. We've still got a way to go.
No, it's much shorter. 10 episodes, which sometimes takes podcasts 10 years to produce.
Yes, we hit this calendar year 2019, we'll be hitting our 200th episode.
That is absolutely fantastic. And tell us a little bit about Footnoting History.
Yeah, so Footnoting History, we started back in 2013, and I was actually just reading back how we started because felt like it was so long ago. I wanted to make sure I got the details right. And I kind of can't believe that my friend and colleague, Elizabeth Cohane-Burbridge, who's our producer and sort of fearless leader, that's what we call her. She was working on her PhD at the time and wanted sort of a creative outlet to talk about all the fun aspects of history and the things that she wasn't allowed to put into her dissertation. So it was like, okay, so we'll just start a podcast. So she sent a message out to a large group of us, of her friends, and said, who wants to do this with me? And she sent it like the second week of January of 2013, and we launched February 2nd. And I didn't realize how close together it was until I went back and looked at it. And now I just kind of think we were really either incredibly naive and optimistic or just plain crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot.
I mean, there's a whole lot of decisions that normally have to like go into it. Did you?
Yeah.
You just thought we're just going to tell stories and this is going to be awesome?
Yeah, well, we kind of had a big group conversation, said who's going to be part of it, who's not, because, you know, a lot of podcasts like yours, you have a specific person who hosts it. Mm-hmm. We rotate. So right now there's 6 of us and every episode is a different person and we continue to rotate through the year. But at that point, we didn't really know who was going to do it, who wasn't. And we had a much larger group that eventually got pared down to the 6 people because it was too many. You know, when you have too many people hosting, it's really hard for a listener to connect to anybody and to sort of know what's coming next. So as it got smaller and smaller and, you know, people had other commitments so they couldn't do it or whatever reason, we started to kind of realize, okay, now with 6 of us, we can build an audience that's going to understand who we all are, and we all have different specialties. So, you know, it took a while for us to figure that out, about a year or 2. But once we did, it just sort of made sense. You know, everybody could cover what they wanted. But when we first started that year, we were doing an episode every week with, you know, like 12 people, and organizing it was chaos, and we just were, you know, we need an episode tomorrow, and we knew right away that we wanted them to be short. The hope was that you could listen to 1 or more full episodes on your daily commute, whatever that commute might be. So we aimed originally for about 15 minutes per episode. Now they're a little longer. They're between 15 and 20, generally speaking. If there's 2 people talking, it gets a little bit longer because, you know, you need more space when there's 2 people having a conversation than you do when it's 1 person just speaking.
Right.
So that's kind of where that came from. Go on. And so this is like, I find, you know, New Yorkers are kind of like the first people who understand the podcast because it really is the perfect environment to have a good podcast for your commute. Yeah, it's actually funny you should mention that because when we started, we're still not all in the same location. I actually only met one of our podcasters who's been with us since the beginning in person last year. So when we first started, I was in New York. Elizabeth, who was the person who had the big idea for it, she was in Atlanta, where she still is. At one point, we were in the U.S., France, Germany, and England all at the same time with our hosts and just all submitting to like one central place. Because the good thing about podcasting is if you have a microphone, it doesn't matter where you are. Exactly. You know, and nobody's going to know where you are when they're listening to you. And so tell me then, if you're all at different places in the world, what was there is there an institutional affiliation? No. We are completely independent. Most of us went to Fordham. That's because that's how we know each other. But we were not a Fordham-run, Fordham-associated entity. We just did it all on our own. And it just happens to be that's, you know, where our community was built. Because when you're in grad school, it's kind of a lot of holding people's hands and going through the fire together. Right. You sort of veer towards these narratives, these stories. What was that sort of decision? What was the goal? Was it to share the stuff that didn't make the dissertation, or were you going for just kind of stuff you wanted to share? Well, I was already out of graduate school when we started. So for me, it was stories I wanted to share. For Elizabeth, it started off originally, you know, this kind of things that you thought were interesting but weren't allowed to put in your papers for pure academia. It sort of has become that we've actually broadened the definition of what's a footnote because when we first started, we were like, okay, so I'm going to talk about this like really obscure topic. Like I did an episode about priests who got kicked out of the English priesthood for bigamy, but it's like not the bigamy that you would think it would be. It just means that your wife had slept with somebody before she slept with you, and then she died, and you decided to become a priest. And somebody said your wife had been with somebody other than you, so you were counted as married twice because everybody she slept with was who you slept with. And then that's like so obscure, you know, and there's like maybe, you know, a handful of instances of it ever happening. And I was like, I'm going to cover this for footnoting history.
Yeah.
And then we realized that what we considered to be a footnote was not what the general public considered to be a footnote. We were making a lot of assumptions about who was listening to us and what they wanted to hear that were not necessarily accurate. I mean, those episodes are still good because they're still interesting, but we kind of were assuming that everybody was super into history in school and remembered everything they were taught. And that's just not true. And it's not fair of us to make that assumption. So we've broadened what that means to be a footnote, and we cover now topics that to us might seem, you know, somewhat more commonplace because, you know, we're historians and that's what we do. Mm-hmm. But if somebody finds us who, you know, hasn't taken history since high school, they might go, oh, okay. Like when we first started, I never would have thought, okay, I'm going to do an episode about how, what happened to the Loyalists when the American Revolution ended.
Right. Because
that's something that, you know, they don't really talk about in a lot of American history classes. It's always about, you know, we won independence sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, so we're just going to stay away from the independence talk because everybody knows it. And then you realize, no, there are a lot of, you know, angles and aspects that people don't hear about that interest us.
Yeah.
And, you know, with podcasting, you're interviewing, so you have to be interested in everything everybody tells you. For us, since we're choosing our own topics, you know, we have to be interested in it because you can tell. You can tell when you're listening to somebody and they don't care.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts there. Especially, I mean, still on the footnotes and just this kind of cool idea of bringing the footnote to the public, because a lot of, you know, when history gets printed in popular presses, the mm-hmm. footnotes disappear.
Right.
So you
sad.
No, but it's kind of this, like, I mean, now I'm thinking about it at a little deeper level, but it makes the idea even more interesting. You're really bridging the gap between, say, the academy and the public.
Right. I like to call it that we translate the information, because you have so many wonderful academic texts out there that are just written with such dense language. Mm. And as much as I love them, you know, if I don't necessarily want to read them on my commute for fun, mm-hmm. you know, so we look at them and we read them, and then we pull the cool parts out that you might want to then tell your friends. And that's kind of where we come into it. You know, we take what interests us from it, do the good research, and then give you the fun story.
And yeah, no, and it's a noble project. The audience, though, the question of audience you mentioned, you sort of thought you were going towards a different audience. Can you talk a little bit about finding your audience?
Well, I mean, it's not that we didn't think we hoped the average person was that's who we wanted to talk to, but we didn't know what their education level would be. And I don't mean that as an insult. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that as a negative at all. It's just that we are coming from it from our perspective, which is as people who have been in graduate school for history, who have been doing this forever, and, you know, had to then sort of go, okay, but what do they want to hear from us as much as we want to talk about it? Mm. You know, because we might want to talk about some random thing, but we have to give the background. When we have a handout that we give to our podcasters when they start with us, uh-huh. that says things like, you know, tell a story like you're telling it to a friend. If you wouldn't tell the story using certain language to somebody, you know, who went to school for something completely different, don't use it in a podcast unless you're going to define it for your audience. Your audience is smart. Your audience can follow you, but they can't know things you haven't told them. Right? So if you just want to come out and start talking about, I don't know, hagiography, or just throwing words out there that they might not have encountered, that's not fair.
Yeah.
You know, but you can say, this is the word, and then add like an aside of this is what this means, and then move on, because they'll follow you. Your audience is very smart. They're listening to you for a reason. They want to learn from you. And they will learn from you, and they'll tell you if they don't like it. I mean, they won't tell you until after you've recorded and released it, because they won't, you know, have heard it at that point. But we'll get comments. You know, I wish you had talked about this, or I love that you talked about that, or now I understand this more. But it's all about kind of providing the information, because you're not going to hurt somebody by explaining something they already know, because they'll realize that it's for somebody else who's listening. You hurt everybody if you don't explain yourself.
I mean, this sounds like not only a master class in podcasting, but also in teaching. I mean, in teaching, you stand in front, right, of 20 to 30 people, all with different intelligences, different levels of education, and somehow you have to talk about fascism.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And make it something that not only do they want to hear about, but that they will remember when they leave.
So how have you found that doing the podcast has changed other things that you do?
It's taught me a lot about realizing that people do want to learn things. You know, I used to be one of those people who was like a super snob and would say, like, if something's historically inaccurate on TV or film or whatever, then, well, forget it. It's not good enough for me. But I've learned that will get people to ask questions, and getting people to ask questions is just so important because it means that they're engaged. You know, I did an episode a year or two ago about Olga Nethersole, who was a British actress who came to the United States and then got arrested in 1900 because she was considered like this lewd, horrible person because of what her character did on stage. And it was really fascinating because, you know, New York was scandalized by the fact that in the show, she not only smoked, but she allowed a man to carry her up to a room.
Oh, boy.
Right? Like alludes that something was going to happen up there. So she got arrested. And when we told the story, or I told the story, I just kind of was straightforward. This is what happened. This is why, you know, what caused it. And then a couple of months later, we saw that there was a young girl or teenage girl who wrote a whole blog post about how my talking about that got her to look into things about feminism.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, okay, because I'm never going to sit there and lecture somebody on my beliefs, you know, because I don't expect other people's beliefs to be the same as mine. But I'm going to do my best to tell the story as I understand it. And then when somebody that's like leading a horse to water, you know, if they then want to go and look it up and it makes them discover something about themselves, that's amazing. And that's one thing I learned. It definitely made me more open-minded to the ways that history can be represented. They don't have to be necessarily perfect. I like my podcasts to be perfect, but I'm not as judgmental about other ways that people present history now, if it means that it gets somebody to, you know, go to the library.
Yeah, as someone who's done both, you know, you completed your master's in history, and you're also doing this podcast. Can you talk a little bit about the level of work that goes into both? Oh yeah, so. Well, or like maybe in a comparative sense, you know, maybe you just because I think people tend to undervalue one or the other. Yeah. Well, okay. So for a podcast, like I was writing one this morning. It would be easier if we were a chronological podcast or had one particular topic. Yeah, there are a lot of podcasts out there who pick a theme, you know, I'm going to talk about the Renaissance and whatever. And those are amazing. And I love those, but we don't do that. So I'll do episodes in the same year about, you know, Napoleonic France, medieval England, revolutionary United States, and, you know, whatever else comes up. So that means I'm constantly building from the bottom up, and we'll have to spend at least a month of research per episode for me. Because it's always something completely different from the one before it, which is I choose my topics. So maybe that's my own fault that I do that. And then it'll take, you know, maybe a week or two to write it. Then the recording process is pretty straightforward at this point because I know what I'm doing. I script, not everybody scripts. A lot of people just like to, you know, have bullet points. Like you said, like when people are teaching, you don't have a script in front of you. You know, you learn your topic and you can present it in other ways. For me, I like to have it written down. I have a performance background, so I view it as a monologue. I'll sit there and I'll look at it, and I'll sometimes, full disclosure, I'll sit a stuffed animal on my desk and talk to him because you're recording in a void. You can laugh, but it's true, and they're amazing, and I love them. And I'm not actually engaging with another person when I'm recording. Yeah. You know?
It's
No,
me in a
that's
quiet room.
it's a great idea. I'm just laughing because I'm staring at a blank screen right now.
That's right. So exactly.
But I have a very active imagination, so
Yeah. There's all different ways you can do it. It's, you can have somebody sit in their room with you if you really want. You can have a picture on the screen, but as long as you know that you're talking to someone or something and you realize that there's somebody out there, you'll just sound so much more engaged.
now does this comes from your training in performance arts?
Yeah, I started vocal training when I was 13.
And what does that consist of?
That consisted of, well, it still consists because I still do it. I trained to be a coloratura soprano and a musical theater singer. So after graduate school, I went into doing more dramatic work, more straight plays without singing. And I pay my bills by working as background / an extra on film and television. So that was an interesting thing because I'm in the unions. I'm in SAG and I'm in Actors Equity, which meant when we started a podcast, I had to get permission to work on it from the union because, it's considered an internet project, which falls under union jurisdiction. But you can take a lot out of a performance class for podcasting. When I took classes, we used to have a lot of lawyers come through because they wanted to learn how to connect with an audience, how to be persuasive, how to tap into emotions and pull things out of texts for when they were presenting in trials. So if anybody's ever looking for a way that doesn't seem like it might necessarily be connected to podcasting, I would definitely suggest looking for an acting class.
That's fantastic advice for just life, right? Just to be a more animated person.
Oh, absolutely. It'll help you observe other people. It'll help you just kind of understand. I do a lot of biography. So for me, I feel like it helps really look at kind of what was motivating people. And I don't want to say I feel like empathy for everybody because some people were just horrible people. But there's a way to understand the way somebody was thinking without necessarily agreeing with them. And when you do that in an acting class, sometimes you play a character that's really kind of awful, but you have to play that character from their perspective. So when you're doing biography and history and presenting it as a story, to an audience that's listening to you for basically, you can almost like a bedtime story that you would read to someone. It does help you sort of understand and make something, more multifaceted to be willing to go into this with them.
And so it is a story, right? And it's a presentation, but
right.
Do you ever feel, or has anyone who's worked with you or people you've talked to mentioned that they feel like they're kind of cheapening the history by making it like too simple or too compelling when it was more complicated? It's complicated probably is something that we say about 20 times an episode, because you're sitting there and you're taking, somebody's life or some event and you really are kind of parsing it down. I don't think that we've ever felt, or I haven't, I can't speak for, every single person who's ever done an episode for us. I don't really feel like it's cheapening because I would rather somebody have a small exposure and then go to either our website and get further reading suggestions or ask questions than I would that they didn't have it at all. And sometimes too much information can be overwhelming for people. I say that as I'm working on an episode that's 2 parts because I just couldn't bring myself to cut it down, but for them, it's hard. There are things that you do cut, and there's sometimes things that are really cool, but just don't have the space in, 20 minutes that you have to fill it. But I really just don't think it's cheapening. I think it's giving an understanding that's an introduction. I'm not trying to help somebody write their dissertation because they're going to have to go into much more depth than that. I can understand why somebody would make that argument. We need more detail, we need everything, but does everybody really need every detail? In the general community, I mean, if you're working on a question of audience, right?
Well, right, exactly. If I'm doing a podcast that's for a group of specialists who, have been doing this their whole life and I just give the basic overview, they're not going to care. But if I do a basic overview and somebody who teaches high school or who teaches undergrads hears it, it might be a perfect introduction for them to use with their students.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of view them in a lot of ways as jumping off points for people.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be more. And that's why I tend to pick smaller topics and then go more in depth in them. Like I did one last summer. That was the entire focus of the entire episode, was just, here are ways that you could avoid being drafted by Napoleon. And it's super small, right? Like, it's a really, really tiny topic. But because it's a really tiny topic, I could talk about it and I get everything in that amount of time.
Right.
I'm not going to sit there and say, well, here's 15 minutes. I'm going to explain the entire 12th century. Because that's just not fair, and you're never going to be accurate. So I try to steer, because the way we work is there's three of us who sort of make up the administration team. There's Elizabeth, who's the producer. I'm the assistant producer. And then Nathan Melson is our audio editor. And so I kind of, not control, but I listen to what everybody wants to talk about, and I'll tell them whether or not I think that fits. And 99.9% of the time it does. But I will steer them in a direction to say, be as specific as possible. The smaller the topic you pick, the more you can give detail, and then it doesn't become cheapening.
Mm-hmm. And then, you get a depth, and at the same time, it can still be used as that introduction.
Right, exactly. It's just, if you want to listen to 15 episodes about the 12th century, we will have 15 episodes about the 12th century. And then you'll get a bigger picture because you can put them together, kind of.
Exactly. And now this is something I've noticed a lot of podcasts. I mean, you would know better than I read on your blog that you had gone to the Sound Education Conference at Harvard. And it seems like a lot of these good podcasts are just sort of created by people who just really wanted to do it.
Right.
What role do you see institutions having in this? And how do you feel about things like when New York Times puts out The Caliphate, and it's like a blockbuster movie?
Yeah. It's interesting because on some level, I wish that institutions had gotten in the game, or at least historical institutions. I can't speak for other, fields, because that's just not what I know about. I wish that they had kind of gotten into it a little earlier. But I do think that there's a benefit to not being attached to one, which is people don't associate you necessarily with a class, right? So if I come out and I'm like, oh, hey, it's Footnoting History. We're here to tell you fun stories. It's like, okay, these are fun people that we can listen to. If I come out and I say, hi, we're from University XYZ, it might feel a little bit more like you're in a classroom. And I don't mean that for the people who are hosting. I mean, because of the guidelines you might have to follow. We're not beholden to anybody. The institutions are starting to get into it now, and I think that's really cool. I think it's great that they're acknowledging that these other podcasts exist, because when you start making one yourself, it sort of means that you're acknowledging that what other people are doing is important. Mm-hmm. You want a part of it too. And I think that's great. But I don't know. I don't know how I would feel if we suddenly decided to be, affiliated with an institution. I kind of like the concept that it does give you a leg down, right? Because you have to scrape your audience together. Mm-hmm. And an institution is going to have a built-in audience. They're going to have a built-in marketing machine. They're going to have built-in people who already know who they are and want to listen to it because of that. Which is great. And I'm jealous of all those podcasts that come out and debut at like number one. And next thing you know, they have like TV shows and book deals.
Yeah.
But we kind of clawed our way up from the bottom, and I'm proud of us for that. I think if somebody wanted to start, hiring us to be on the BBC or PBS, we wouldn't say no.
I hope you're listening, BBC.
I'm not going to lie. Those are great opportunities. And I think that it's important for the genre that institutions have them, because one of the things I actually had not really thought about until I went to Sound Education was what percentage of people have never listened to a podcast. And by institutions having them, it definitely raises awareness, because somebody might know about such and such a university and then go, oh, what's a podcast? Because they have one, and then that could lead them to finding some of our more independent ones that are out there. Whereas if I just come out and start posting on Twitter that I have a podcast. I have to hope somebody finds it, and they have no reason to want to listen to me.
Right.
There's no pre-existing relationship or reason for that to draw their attention. So I think it's a good thing that they're there. I wish the playing field was, more even.
Mm-hmm.
But, like you said, a lot of podcasts don't last past 10 episodes. So there's that to deal with too. No matter what you do, I think as a podcaster, you're sort of fighting to get recognized. And in a lot of ways, it's just by persisting.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at podcast apps, I mean, there's hundreds being put out every day. And it's hard, especially when you're trying to compete with something that has been out there for that long, or even it's brand new, but comes from a, PBS or I don't know, whatever other large thing you want to talk about. Because everybody has one now.
Yeah, of course. And what is the now? To get to 6 years, you've been consistent. What is the the brushes with death you've had, or what are some of the struggles, some of the pitfalls of such an approach to history?
I can say we've never had an almost dying. Like, we've never had a point where I was just like, we're not going to exist anymore.
That's awesome.
I don't know how. I wish I could give you a reason why that happened. I think sheer determination, because I'm the kind of person who, if my name is on something, it's going to be out, even if it means I'm like really stressed about it the night before. We did have one time fairly early on where we had a host who had a problem come up, and they had not submitted I yell a lot about people submitting on time, and this person had not, and they had not even told us what was going to happen. And at the time I was working background on a TV show that I had to be at work at 4 a.m. And I found out at midnight the night before this person was not going to have their episode in, and it had to air in 3 days. So I drove to work early, and I literally sat in my car with the flashlight on my phone at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. waiting for work to start in the middle of Brooklyn, handwriting an episode that could fill that spot, because I was like, there's no way on my watch we're not having an episode come out on time.
Yeah. Wow. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is.
I mean, I was bitter. It was not my happiest episode, but things happen. So we ended up adjusting that. Now our submission schedule is so much different because we can't have close calls. We have had people leave. We've had people come in. We've had people who we've worked with to help them, help their presentation get better, because these are historians. They're not performers. Right. And no, we don't expect anybody to just be a natural in front of the microphone. I don't expect myself to be perfect in front of the microphone. But I would say, other than, because we don't have control over everybody else's lives, other than people, not submitting on time, we've really not had any problems. In terms of, if we're we're going to do it, we kind of do.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I don't sleep a lot sometimes.
Well, yeah, let's talk a little bit about that too. This whole idea that, here we are, it's in the evening now, I'm after work, right, and I have other things to do, and this is kind of I'm doing it because actually this brings me great joy, and it's something I want to do. But can you talk a little bit about that effort, finding the space and suggestions on that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm lucky in that my work schedule is very flexible. The way background work works is that you don't work if you don't submit for it. So if something gets really, really backed up, even though we don't make any money right now off the podcast, right, I have the power to say, I'm not going to put in for work on Friday. This will get done. Which makes me very lucky. Not everybody can do that, and not necessarily everybody should have to do that. That's a choice that I make because I want it. It's important to me that it get done and it get done well. I maybe am too hard on myself and on other people when it comes to that, but I'm I feel like in a lot of ways I'm the person that somebody can say, I couldn't do this, can you do it? And I will do it. It is a lot of work. It is hard to squeeze it in. So we will tell our podcasters the year before what their due dates are.
Whoa.
So the way it works, our stuff
That's
is
stressing me out a little bit.
yeah. So basically, the way it works is I'm giving out all our secrets now. But
No. I mean, you're helping somewhere along the line create, something that's going to be amazing.
So what we do is starting in around October, maybe November, we'll make sure everybody wants to come back for the next year. Then I sit down with a calendar for the next year and I figure out exactly how many episodes we're going to have and how many that means per person. Typically what that means is the three of us who are on the administration team, we will have 4 episodes per year, and then our contributing podcasters will have 3. So I'll sit down, I'll say, okay, everybody, are we all on? Everybody's on for their 4, their 3? Okay, everybody's good. Then we'll say, okay, here are your due dates. And they'll know that by November sometime. And because we have to have submissions in December so we can air in January. So, our year is very weird. So we'll say, okay, November 1st or November 15th, we need, or December, depending on how late we get it out to them, I need your topic. And then usually there's a month after the topic that the audio is due. The reason for that is because if multiple people want to do the same topic, somebody's going to have to change. And I need to give them time to do that. To let them figure out who's going to do what or whatever. If somebody has a problem with a topic that they don't know what to do, they can have a conversation with usually me or Liz, and we'll help them figure it out. We also have a running list of topics that have been suggested to us that we can say, okay, you don't know what you want to do? Here's something. So it kind of works out that way, but most of the time people will come up with their own. And then so that'll be due. And then so we'll have everybody's episodes for the year typically by June.
Wow.
Yeah. So it'll be like topic, next month episode, next month topic, next month episode. And that allows for me on the scheduling end to be able to place them where I think they should air. So like if somebody's doing a biography on a specific woman, I might purposely put it in March for a Women's History Month.
Awesome.
Or if I know when a holiday is, I'll specifically put something about the American Revolution by 4th of July.
Your famous Halloween releases.
So the Halloween one, I recorded my Halloween one last March.
Jeez.
Yeah. We are very big on, if you want to do it early and you want to submit it to us, please give it, because it builds a cushion for people who can't submit on time for whatever reason. And it gives everybody a breathing time at the end of the year. You don't want September, October to come and you to be like, oh my God, I have 3 episodes I didn't do yet. That's stressing people out. The Halloween one, actually, that is separate. That doesn't count in their total numbers. That's optional.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they have to do 3 or 4, depending, episodes. And then the Halloween one is if they happen to want to do it. Our Halloween episodes we call them History for Halloween. And we do 1 a year. And it's very short, little scary things that we've pulled from history. Mine are always newspaper articles from whatever country, whatever time period I felt like looking at that year, and somebody's ghost story that got reported. And they're a lot of fun, and they come out every year, and people seem to like them. I wasn't sure how that would go. That's one of those experiments, Yeah. When we first started to do it, I was like, is this going to be cool, or is this going to be a stud? It sounds like it should be really cool, but you don't know until it's out there. And they've been pretty well received, so that's exciting. I'm actually not a Halloween fan. So when they first started talking about doing a Halloween episode, I was like, oh, gosh, I'm going to have to sit there and be really excited about this. But then I was like, oh, I can read newspapers, and historical newspapers are so much fun. If you ever have the opportunity, anybody out there who's listening, to go and just look up random terms in historical newspapers, you'll find some really cool stuff.
Oh yeah. And not just a short interjection here. And not to mention there's thousands of newspapers from all over. I mean, I was teaching a course last semester, and I made them go look up just the Times from London. Just going through imperial newspapers, and their minds, they were just like, this is out there?
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so great. Another one of my favorite things to go through, which doesn't help for the Halloween episode, are old catalogs.
Oh,
Actually, I'll send you the link for it. There's this Flickr account for like the International Book Archive, or I don't remember the exact name of it. And it's just like all these old books that have been scanned onto Flickr. And it's just like little, and you click on them and it's like, oh my gosh, it's an ad for, buying corsets in 1889. And then there's like a link on the bottom and you can open it up and it shows you the whole catalog.
oh, wow.
And I have many a night gone down the rabbit hole of looking at like these different ads that people were getting delivered to their houses. And,
The ads are totally the best part. Like when I'm going through like World War II Cuban newspapers, and I'm just like, my eyes go straight to the Bacardi ad every time.
yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. So like that's how I kind of turned something that I didn't necessarily want to do, which was a Halloween thing, where all my other podcasters love Halloween, into being something that I really enjoyed, because it gives me an excuse to go down the newspaper / catalog rabbit hole and see, oh my gosh, this person in Germany, pretended to be a ghost to haunt somebody out of their house so that they could have it. Like, it's like all these crazy things. And you're going, okay, these people were reporting it like I saw a ghost to the police. Right. And then the police had to go and investigate it. And it's like a cool thing to share because it actually happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we could sit there and make up ghost stories, but that's not as fun.
No, not at all. And it's so funny because, you were always reading about this crisis in the humanities and enrollments in history courses. Yeah. And like, there's so much fun history out there that like,
oh, totally.
It's good to be doing this kind of thing. Now, you mentioned in an earlier comment, like they record it and then it goes to editing.
Right.
So where do you find an editor, computer person in the midst of historians?
God bless you, Nathan. I love you for this because we all learned it on the fly.
Awesome.
Nathan, we kind of just fell into our roles naturally. It just sort of was like, oh, I'll do that. Oh, I'll do this. That's how I ended up doing social media. Nathan ended up doing audio editing. And he's really great at it. He's also, since he's one of the administration team, he's doing everybody's editing for every episode. And then also doing 4 episodes of his own.
Nice.
So, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, why did I arrange it that the administrative team has more episodes? We just have so much work all the time. But it's great.
So passionate about it.
Yeah, I don't even know. I was like, sure, we'll do 4. It's going to be amazing. So like, while I'm doing the scheduling and Liz is dealing with people and I'm doing the social media, and we just started a newsletter. So Liz is doing the newsletter and Nathan's doing the editing. He said I would do it. And then he did it.
Yeah, and it's been quite a team effort and growing. And so you just started the newsletter, and we'll include the links and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of features you have on the podcast and what makes it so great?
What makes it so great? We're just great. No. What we have a variety of people who all have their own style, which to me makes it really special. Because you're never going to get that in most podcasts. It's 1 or 2 people hosting together, and you're going to get their view through the whole time. If we all sat down and did a topic that was identical, you would have 6 different versions of it. And I think that's kind of great. It also is good because it helps us be really well-rounded. I'm not really an Americanist. I very rarely will do American history. It does come up. There are aspects of it that I like. But, Elizabeth does a ton of American history. So there's really not a lot of gaps. We're trying to expand. We do a lot of Western history, which, is good. But at the same time, we are well aware there's a lot more out there. So we've been expanding in that sense. We just had an episode by Leslie that had to do with Chairman Mao and his love of the mango. So... we're branching out. We have there's an episode I want to do about Kenya I haven't done yet, but we have one about Kenyan independence fights. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to cover the whole world one little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm. It's a big place to cover.
It's a big place to cover, but I think it's good that we have 6 perspectives, because we'll all focus on different things. And we've just started doing this now where on our website, if people look at a post for a specific episode and they click on the host's name, they get a list of every episode by that host.
Cool.
So you can pick your favorite.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, oh my gosh, I listened to that interview with Christine and I can't stand her. And then every time one of my episodes comes out, you don't have to listen to it. So it's like you're getting 6 shows in one.
Well, that's a rather negative way to spin a cool.
well, I didn't want to say, well, you can pick a favorite, because I don't want people to pick a favorite, because I want us to like everybody.
Well, but, so where do you see this going? Do you see a splintering into 6 different podcasts? Or?
Oh, I hope not. That would make me so sad.
The band's not going to break up.
No, we've rotated people out and in. Sometimes we've had some great podcasters who, when it came crunch time for them finishing their PhD, they were like, I just can't do this anymore. I don't have the time right now. So they, cycle out, and then we find somebody else who cycles in. We have a new podcaster who's going to start in our next rotation. I'm really excited about her. Her name's Kristen, and she's really fantastic. And she's going to be talking about, I guess I'm announcing her.
Yeah, go. Has this been cleared with the board?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I am part of the board, so I'd be yelling at myself. She's going to be talking about King John of England and his love of dogs.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's going to be, I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be super cool. But, people will get to know her, and she'll be another great addition to us, that she's replacing somebody who we also love and hope will, eventually one day come back when her work is done. But because we're large, one person leaving doesn't kill us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of pros and cons to both sides of working with a group. For anybody who's thinking about podcasting, there are pros to working by yourself, and there are pros to working in a group. Working in a group, making group decisions can be hard sometimes. It's extra stress to have to try and coordinate people. But at the same time, you have lots of topics that can be covered, different perspectives. You can team up sometimes and do episodes with other people. Somebody will cover a topic that you didn't want to do. But if you're doing it by yourself, you have complete control over all the content all the time.
Right.
And that's cool. You can set your own schedule. You're not beholden to anybody else's opinions. So there's definitely, it's about how do you work better.
Right. It's kind of like being single. So
yes, it is.
So someone who's on the edge, who's deciding what to do. Yeah. What is your advice to them? Because now looking back, I mean, or we could do it this way, kind of like the ahistorical, whatever. If you could talk to 2013 Christine, what would you say?
Oh gosh, run away. No, I'm kidding. It's going to be a lot more work than you think it is, no matter how much you think it's going to be. I'm of the belief that everybody can podcast, but not everybody should, and only the person doing it can make that decision.
Whoa, that's nice.
I think it's a great medium because you can put your voice out there and nobody can stop you. It's the only thing stopping you is if you don't have an internet connection. Yeah, really, because it's
even if you have a mobile hotspot, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's really kind of wonderful that way. It's a great thing, but you have to be willing to put in the work. And you can say that until you're blue in the face. You're not going to really understand it until you're doing it. I didn't understand it until I was doing it. I'm willing to guess you probably didn't realize how much it would be before you started to do it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's a lot. Editing.
But sorry, again, on the same sort of thing, though, I also didn't understand how much I would enjoy it. Well,
right, exactly. The payoff is fantastic. When you start to see your download numbers go up and down, it's like, oh my gosh, people listening to me. Yeah. Or when reviews start coming in, it can be really exciting. But I do think the biggest thing is identify with yourself whether or not you should. What do you want to get out of podcasting is a really big thing to ask yourself. Because if you're doing it for fame and you're doing an independent podcast, that's probably not going to happen, at least not instantly. If it does, then tell me how you did it. I think it's important to realize that you're going to have to do a lot of talking to people. Social media is key because you're going to be your own champion. So you have to be willing to it's not just really about I'm going to record a podcast, I'm going to stick it out there. That's fine if you don't want anybody to listen to you. You have to educate people in how to listen to you. And that was something I got out of Sound Education. I hadn't really thought about it. And now after that, I went home and I wrote a page for our website that was how to listen to a podcast. Because somebody's going to find you and you're going to be their first podcast. And that's really awesome. And it's an honor. And they shouldn't have a problem doing it because you should be teaching them how. So there's like a lot of little details that you really need to consider. And there are more that are going to pop up as you go.
Yeah. And speaking, I mean, these details are always coming up, and there is that constant like act of preparing yourself and relearning and teaching yourself new things. You mentioned back there payoff. And you have this another great blog post. You're a fantastic writer. You say,
thank you.
6 years of work, 1 line of resume. And
God, yeah.
That's like just kind of a haunting line.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's true, especially because, performance resumes are even smaller than, academic resumes because they have to fill in the back of a headshot. So you only get 1 page. But it's true. Nobody cares. When they're listening to they don't care how much work you put into it necessarily.
That's not what my mom told me.
Yeah, I don't mean that to be negative, but it's true, right? Yeah. You have to be proud of the product you put out. Other people who listen to it are only going to see that end product. They're not going to see you, crying because you couldn't find this one source that was going to give you the answer to all your questions. They're not going to care that I was writing at, 2 a.m. in my car. They're going to care about what I actually give to them. And that's great because it means that they don't need to be concerned with the mess that could happen behind closed doors. But it can be really disheartening when you look at your resume sometimes and you're just like, oh, I've been doing this for 6 years. I don't even know how many hours. And it's just like one little section there. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it because you should absolutely do it. And if you become well known for what you're doing, then that one line is going to stick out to somebody. But you don't know how long that's going to take.
No.
There are ways to help yourself, get ahead. Consistency is the biggest one. I'm going to have an episode out once a month. Well, then make sure you have that episode out once a month because if people really like you, they're going to be waiting for it.
Right.
Set a tone and try and stick with it. If you're bouncing all over the place, that's a problem. 1 minute you're a comedy, the next minute you're like just talking about something that has, I guess, come down to truth in marketing. To really make it more succinct. If you're going to be a podcast that talks about politics, tell people you're going to be a podcast that talks about politics.
Right.
If you're going to be one that talks about history, but not politics, make sure you talk about history, but not politics. Because the audience for whatever you want to talk about is out there. You just have to tell them who you are in the correct way.
And it is kind of extraordinary to see when you look and kind of see like the various, the world is listening, and right. it's extraordinary to see. When you're in a classroom, and I taught at Temple, so like, okay, so most of the students are from Philadelphia. Temple has a great, or from Pennsylvania area. Temple has a great international student, but it's nowhere near the sort of international hits you get on a podcast from all over the world. So people are out there. You're totally right.
They are. I almost lost my mind like our second or third year in when I did a Google search for us and I found that we were reviewed in a newspaper in the Bahamas. I was like, this is the coolest thing to ever happen to me. And it wasn't even my episode that they were talking about. I didn't care. It was just that they were talking about footnoting history in the Bahamas.
That sounds like line 2 on the resume.
Well, yeah, it's cool. We had an episode that got picked up by CBC's radio playlists thing they did, and that was awesome. It's another country to us because we're the U.S. and that's Canada.
Right.
But you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, okay, people really are hearing me all over the world, and that's kind of amazing. That's why I think it's something that if you really want to do it, you should do it. But if you don't want to do it, or you're not going to put in the time, and you don't want to do the work, don't do it. Because you're not going to be happy, and you're going to be leaving something out in the world that they can hear that you're not proud of.
And this is obviously good advice for anything you pursue in life, not just podcasting. Yeah. Especially true in history. The amount of sentences that I've written and deleted is just
it's like 5 books.
Yeah. That's an enormous amount of time. Sentences that I were either wrong or not good, and it's just.
Oh my gosh, yes. I once was giving somebody advice. They were giving a speech and they weren't exactly sure about how long the person had worked in the specific job that they were talking about. And they were like, do I say it was, more than 20 years? I think it might have been. I know it was more than 10. And I was like, well, you don't want to be the person who gets called out for saying 12 and it's really 15. So, but it was more than 10 or 15. So you say decades.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not wrong. If it was over one decade, it was 2 decades at least, and that could mean up to 25 decades. It doesn't matter. So there's a lot of you really have to go in and work at making sure that everything you say is accurate, which I guess, I know you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. I brought it up to myself. The number one thing you have to be able to do when you release a podcast, and it's the same for anything artistic, is be able to take criticism.
Mm. And be able to listen to yourself critically too.
Yes, absolutely. You have to be able to sit there and say, oh my gosh, I sounded awful on that, or I said this wrong, or I need to fix this. You are doing a lot of work, and your work should be good, and people are going to have opinions on it. Mm-hmm. You have opinions on things when you read them or you watch them, right? This is nothing different from that, just because you're the one who's making it. Don't fight with people. They're allowed to have their opinions. Some of them are going to be nasty. Some of them are going to be amazing. You're going to feel like you're on cloud 9, but you have to develop a thick skin, and you have to be willing to admit when you're wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important lesson. And you can really tell when people have been in the performing arts, because I mean, one time I was in a master class with violin, and I was working with a Russian guy, and he said, the problem with you Americans is before you dive into the criticism, they always say, oh, it sounded so nice. That was so good.
Yeah.
And he just laid in, oh man, he was so insulting, but I learned so much.
Yeah. I used my voice teacher, I love her. She, I think, gave me 3 compliments my whole life. And I had to earn them because, there's always room to get better. So whenever somebody comes up to me and they're like, oh, especially if somebody I know, and they're like, oh my gosh, it was so great. I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, okay, but what did you really think?
Yeah.
Because, I want to get better.
Right.
And I'm not saying I want somebody to be nasty. There's never really a need for somebody to be nasty.
No, but it should be helpful.
Right.
Well, Christine, we're drawing near to the hour, and we like to finish off Hour of History with a suggestion.
Yes.
Would you like to go first?
Oh, okay. Sure. I'm going to suggest the play, The History Boys by Alan Bennett.
Okay.
It's also a movie if you'd rather watch a movie. But I warn you in advance that the ending is different in the movie from the play. So you can read the play, or you can watch the movie. It sort of, I don't want to say launched, but made people like Dominic Cooper and James Corden famous. And the author, Alan Bennett, playwright, is tremendous. He actually started off as an Oxbridge-trained medieval historian, and then became a performer, and then became a playwright. So I sort of view him as my kindred soulmate. And that's why I'm putting it out there, because it's a play that's about the study of history and about being in school preparing to go to university for this group of boys in 1980s England.
Fantastic. I think I've heard of that, but I've never seen it.
Okay, you're missing out.
Well, now I'm going to see it.
I'm a junkie for it. So that was the first thing I thought of when you said suggest something.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, and mine is kind of it's fiction, but historical fiction. A.G. Yoshikawa's Musashi. A.G. Yoshikawa wrote this book in 1935 in Japan. It's about Sengoku Japan, medieval Japan. A classic samurai story, but it was released serially, so he had to release it episode by episode. Yes. So although it's 1,000 pages,
it doesn't feel like it when you're reading it by episode.
Right, and no, exactly, and it leaves you with a cliffhanger each chapter. The chapters are relatively short, and I read it first in high school, and it just had a fundamental impact on me, and it was a lot of the themes that we talked about today, and I kind of, as I was thinking of something to suggest, I kind of figured we were going to talk about a lot of these themes, but
right, yeah.
The main character is always, certain things happen, but he's always looking to perfect his technique. His technique just happens to be swordsmanship, but
we're verbal swordsmen, okay?
Totally, 100%. And there's this pursuit, and as long as you, whether it be podcasting or doing history or being a lawyer or an actor or what a musician, you got to have that drive and just an interest in making yourself better. And I found that so inspirational in high school. Oh, yeah. It's a fantastic book.
True. I think I'm going to have to read it.
Yeah. And I mean, it is long, so I apologize for that.
No, long is good because it gets you invested.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we're kind of going away from, the sort of long books. And
it's sort of like a television series, right? It's long form storytelling.
Exactly. And that's why hour of history, you know, like I feel like, how fast did this hour go by, Christine?
Oh, super fast. Although I did think to myself, oh my gosh, I'm rambling so much. That's okay. Sorry, everybody.
I think it was insightful, and I urge you to go check out the show notes and check out all the excellent links that Christine Caccipuoti gives to you. And of course, go and listen to Footnoting History if you haven't already, and subscribe.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place. So long.
Thanks again for listening. Make sure to check out hourofhistory.com/Rex for all the recommendations mentioned during the show. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, be sure to head over to our blog at hourofhistory.com/blog, where you'll find topics that were covered in the podcast as well as others. And that concludes this week's episode. We thank you again for listening, and we hope to have you back here next week at the Hour of History podcast.
Hey there, Hour of History podcast listeners. Have you seen our website, hourofhistory.com? It has some excellent content that has aged very well. Discussions about places such as Syria, North Korea, and the United States, still relevant today, even though the podcast was recorded nearly a year ago. Check out hourofhistory.com and scroll for a bit. Stay for a while, and you won't regret it. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place.